Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the newest episode of the Yakkity Yak Fishing Podcast. My name is Anthony. Today, we're talking about fish identification and safe handling practices for new beginner anglers as part of the uh, new series, Anyone Can Fish. This is episode number 4 or 5. This is number 5. This is episode number 5, I think. And we're just gonna cover up that specific topic. I mean, if you're out there catching fish, you're brand new to this, you're trying to figure it out. By now, you've probably caught some fish. You might know what you've caught. You might not. The goal with today's episode is to make it so you guys actually can figure out what you've caught and maybe know what they are and maybe learn a little bit more about what you can do to catch more of them. And so let's get into it. Ernie, good morning, Ernie. How are you, sir? Hope you're having a fantastic day today, brother. Oh, man. Went fishing last night. Was not truthfully speaking, was not completely ready for this morning. So it's going to be a little rough, but bear with me. We got it set up best we can get it, and I hope to be able to give you guys some information. If you are not new to fishing, there's a good chance a lot of this you've already know. But if you are new to fishing, I promise you that you will learn something by the end of this episode, and I hope that you can put it to good use. Morning, Rhonda. Yes, we are just starting the day, but it will be fantabulous. Got to go fishing last night. We ended up skunking, but it is part of it. But it was a nice, beautiful sunset. Tried a new spot. Shayna just really wanted to go for catfish last night. Our buddy Travis came up, and we all went fishing together, and we did what we could. 10 rods out in the water. Had freshwater drum for bait and skipjack. And yeah, so we did our best, try what we could. Oh, Chrissy's not that bad, Ernie. Chrissy's not that bad. You tell her I said good morning. Oh, like I said, you have to excuse me a little bit. Was not quite prepared for this morning, but we will do what we can. It'll just be a little rough around the edges, if you will. Big Slim 91. Good morning. Like I said, hope everybody's doing fantastic. While I am here and while I'm thinking about it, though, next episode, rather than be on Saturday, is going to be on Sunday next week. Same time, 7 a.m., but it will be on Sunday instead of Saturday due to work. And from this point on, it will be going back and forth between Saturdays and Sundays. I will talk about it every episode, what it's going to be the next weekend, and I will do my best to keep the community posts going, talking about it and whatnot. Yes, Rhonda, I am definitely going to have my hands full with her. I already know. I knew the day I brought her home and I saw how much attitude she had that I'm definitely going to have a second mini carbon copy of my wife. It'll be interesting. Let's just say it that way. All right. So, again, welcome you all to the Yakkity Yak Fishing Podcast. Today we're talking about everything involving fish identification and fish safe handling practices. This is both for safety of you as the angler and safety of the fish. There are certain things that people don't commonly talk about when it comes to fish handling, especially from the catch and release aspect. And obviously, while we are quote unquote tormenting these fish, according to some people, to have them in and have a good time, the best thing we can do is to handle them safely. So if we are releasing them, that they can live a completely normal and happy life. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so we're talking about several different species today. The biggest thing we're going to go over here is that I'm going to go over popular species in terms of what a lot of people consider sport fish. So we're going to have some of those. We're also going to have some of the not so popular species, but things that are commonly found here in the United States in freshwater fishing. If you are new to the sport, you're going to come across these. And the idea, like I said, with this episode is that hopefully you guys can identify what you actually caught. That way, one, if you're doing something and you're catching more than one of these at once, you kind of know what you're doing in terms of, oh, hey, I want to catch this species. This is what I did. But two, in terms of any kind of legal harvesting, you have to know what kind of species it is, because a lot of states are going to have regulations saying you can only have so many of a certain size in order to keep them. And if obviously we don't want anybody getting tickets or anything like that for misidentifying fish and then having illegal catches. That's not what we're about here. The Yakkity Yak Fishing Podcast, we are 100% supportive of legal fishing and of legal harvest if you want to, but also we do support catch and release. And again, the safe handling practices is to allow these fish that we catch to be able to go back into the wild and be 100% normal and not have any kind of life-altering damage done. With that being said, the first species we're going to cover is the largemouth bass. It is surprisingly not a bass. A lot of people say, oh, hey, it's its own separate species, but actually a largemouth bass is actually more closely related to a bluegill than it is to a actual bass, which, misleading to some people. But if you break it down to the basic science level and genus and family and all that other fancy stuff that, some people know about and some people don't, they're actually a sunfish. But a largemouth bass, they're going to be greenish in color. They're going to be found in lakes, rivers, ponds, creeks, pretty much any kind of freshwater body. With them being a sunfish, they don't have to have the absolute best water conditions, so they are quite easy to find in all parts of not only the United States, but actually several other countries as well. There's two different main strains of largemouth bass. You have the Florida strain and you have the northern strain. Those are the two main ones. There are some other ones. But specifically dealing with largemouth, those are the main two. I know here in Tennessee, they stock the Florida strain largemouth. They tend to grow bigger. They're not quite as aggressive as the northern strain, but they do get bigger faster just due to the way they're set up. So, we're going to pull up some pictures, talk about more of the colors and stuff for you guys to be able to see. As you can see, they're a greener body. They have a lateral line that's very pronounced, different color. A lot of them will have these spots on the top, and this will vary. The patterns you see on these things, you'll see some that have vertical stripes, more like this guy. I know that's a drawing, but vertical stripes look more like this guy or like this one. It has a very pronounced lateral line, different patterns, and that's based on, watercolor, water clarity, water conditions, food sources, what they're eating, whatnot, time of year. All that stuff makes a difference on these patterns. And actually, I'm going to bring this lady up. She has actually just caught a world record largemouth. This one's a line class record. I don't remember off the top of my head what she used. I want to say she used 6 pound. It was using 6 pound line. It was either 6 or 12, and I believe it's an 18 pound bass. So, congrats to her. Obviously, she's put good technique and good strategy together to be able to get something that large landed on that light of line. So congrats to her and her new record. So again, these are things that are quite commonly seen. You see, this is a lake. This little kid fishing caught it. Then here's some more of the patterns I was talking about, like all these different patterns, the stripes on the cheek, the spots, the lateral line spots, how green they are, how brown they are. Like here's another one. This one's really dark. I will say, generally speaking, if it has a quote unquote prettier pattern or a darker body, then it's usually sitting in clearer water or around a lot of vegetation. And the idea is that when they do the color up and pattern stuff, it's like this right here, where they're just trying to match their territory, their area. And it's both for safety and for camouflage. They are a predatory fish, right? So they don't want to be seen by the prey. But they also don't want to be eaten alive either. Now with these guys, I'm guilty of this. I don't ever really truly think about it, but like right here, this is not how you want to hold a bass. You're holding with smaller fish. It's not as big of a deal, but once that weight gets heavier on that fish, you'll end up breaking their jaw. If you're going to hold a bass, you want to either hold it more like this one or like this lady is here, this guy is here, where you hold them horizontal. And that's just to distribute the weight across their spine and around their jaw and everything to prevent them from preventing her breaking. Because again, if you're doing catch and release, we want these fish to be completely normal when they're done. And this is going to go This is going to go for most of these species with the horizontal or the straight vertical. With these fish not getting as big, the vertical is not as big of a problem. But you'll see later, I'll go over it with some of these other species. They get really large, that vertical even can be a problem for them as well. But like I said, we'll talk about that later. The next species I want to cover is the smallmouth bass. These are going to prefer clearer water. But again, like the bass, they're technically a sunfish. They're going to prefer colder water. They're going to prefer, honestly, they're going to prefer rocks over vegetation. You can catch them in weedy areas, but it's not normal. It's not their, I'm saying it's not that it's not normal. Sorry, it's not preferred. If they're going to like clear water, moving water, honestly, is one of the most popular places to target them. Moving water, clean rocks, big rocks, small rocks, pea gravel, all that stuff, regular transition areas, boulders. These guys, one of their favorite foods is crayfish. So it's quite popular to catch them on tubes and other plastics that imitate crayfish. But, again, different patterns. Again, based on water clarity and area, you see this one's got a little more spots, a little bit lighter color. This one's got the same lighter color, but it's got stripes instead. And it's around wood and stuff because they have the little bars instead. Then you got ones that aren't as quote unquote, some of them are more camouflage looking, right? These have more splotches, more stripes and such. And then you have some that are more green and kind of plain. That one kind of looks like a largemouth bass, right? So what's the biggest difference between a largemouth and a smallmouth? It's actually the jaw line. So a smallmouth bass, see where the eye is right here? The smallmouth, the jaw is going to stop before the back of the eye. Whereas this largemouth, if you look, let me see with the jaw shut. Here we go. The jaw is past the back of the eye. You see what I'm saying? That's the easiest way to tell between a largemouth and a smallmouth, because you will catch some sometimes that look very similar due to their patterns or due to the water they're in being a little greener as opposed to brown. Or vice versa. I mean, if you catch a largemouth and it's more brown than green, you're not sure. That's the easiest way to tell. Like I said, the jaw, if it's a largemouth, finishes behind the eye. And if it's a smallmouth, it finishes before the eye. Pontoon Jody, Art and Adventure with Tasha. Good morning. Hope you guys are doing fantastic. We are going over fish identification and fish handling today. I hope all you guys are having fantastic days. If you are going out fishing, I hope you guys are being safe. Double hook angling. I missed you, brother. How you doing? And let's keep rolling with it. All right, spotted bass. So a spotted bass and a largemouth bass are going to look very, very similar. In fact, some people would argue that they're the same fish. They are not. Again, they are a sunfish species. They don't get as big as a largemouth or a smallmouth. There's actually several varieties of the spotted bass. You have the Alabama bass. You have the true spotted bass. And there's a couple of little oddball ones that I've personally have never caught. Again, just various genetic mutations based on areas and locations. It's sort of like the strains I was talking with largemouth bass. They're all basically the same fish, but there's a little tiny thing here and there that makes them genetically a slight difference. And so you'll see those people, those get named up later. Like there's even ones in the same, like these three are technically the black bass family, right? That's what they're labeled as on the common tongue. Like I said, they're not really a bass; they're a sunfish. But you have the Guadalupe bass, you have the red-eye Coosa bass, you have a Swanee bass, and all these are they're just a slightly different genetic mutation from over time, from being in different areas of water, different places on the planet, different food sources and such. And so you get these different varieties of fish. Like I think in Georgia, there's eight of them. And they actually do a program in Georgia. I think Tennessee does it too, but they do one where if you catch a certain number of those species, you get a plaque. Just because they are recognized as different species. And it's part of their, you have the Tennessee Angler Recognition Program in Tennessee. It's called the TARP. I don't remember what it's called in Georgia, but like I said, if you catch a lot of those species, you actually get a plaque that says, "Hey, I've caught this many of these species. Look at me," right? So, but again, the spotted bass and largemouth bass are pretty much going to look exactly the same. The biggest and easiest way to tell if it's a spotted bass or a largemouth bass is to touch its tongue. Now, why does that matter? Because if you touch the tongue on a largemouth bass, I'm sorry, yeah, if you touch the tongue on a largemouth bass, it's going to be smooth. If you touch the tongue on a spotted bass, it's going to feel like it has sandpaper on it. That's how you know it's a spotted bass. There actually is another species. It's a hybrid between spotted bass and smallmouth bass called a meanmouth. A meanmouth bass, and it looks a little different. Let's see if I can get them pulled up here. A meanmouth bass is where it looks more like a smallmouth bass, but again, they're a little more stunted in growth in terms of they don't get as large. These are this hybrid, and the temperament on them is really aggressive, hence meanmouth. But it is a smallmouth and spotted bass hybrid. In fact, here's a good example right here. See the eye right here, the jaw on this. See how it's closer to being. It's not past the eye, but it's not in front of the eye like a smallmouth was. It's a lot closer. These are really, really hard to identify. They are rare because it's not a normal occurrence. Obviously, it's happening enough. There's tons of pictures of them and stuff, right? And they're recognized by a lot of states as a species themselves. But it is not. It's not easily replicated. Let me just say it that way. Like if you tried to make this species in a lab, they have trouble trying to replicate it. Actually, see these have a lot bolder patterns. I don't know if I can just pull up better. I did not, but they have a lot more significant patterns as opposed to a smallmouth bass. See how they're more green and everything too. I mean, they literally are like a perfect blend between a smallmouth and a spotted bass. And like I said, the meanmouth comes from the fact that they are very aggressive in their temperament. I myself, I think I've only ever caught one over the years, and I still couldn't tell you for sure if I did or not, because like I said, they're so close to the species that they're from that it is hard to tell. And the biggest thing is, like, obviously if this jaw was shut, it would be close to the back of the eye. So I would still say it was a smallmouth just from looking at it at a glance, but because of how close it is to being at the back of the eye, that's where you know that, right? And again, this is the one I caught, quote unquote caught, because like I said, I don't know 100% if I did. I did not touch the tongue, so I cannot tell you if they have a tooth patch like a spotted bass, but I would be willing to assume that they do. But yeah, something you didn't know. Like I said, I didn't know about the meanmouth till a couple years ago. And like I said, I'm pretty sure I've caught one, but again, I'm not 100% sure. So if you guys have caught one, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't caught one, well, hope you do, because they're pretty cool looking fish, and they do get to be fairly large. I mean, smallmouth bass in Tennessee, if you catch a 5-pounder, it's considered a trophy fish. I think the length record also I think is 20. Is the way the TARP Tennessee Angler Recognition Program is set up. It's based on, they do, if I'm not mistaken, it's weight and length, not just length. So if you catch one over a certain size, then that's when they'll give you a certificate in the mail for you, which is pretty cool. Something I need to do more of, because I've definitely caught some that were in the category for it over the years, and it's good stuff. I mean, it's just another, programs like that are just another way to not only say, yes, I'm learning in terms of fish identification and skill, but the fact that if you're able to repeat it, because you technically can get a certificate for every single one you catch. Now in Tennessee, I don't know if every state's the same way, but in Tennessee, if you're going to do that, you have to pay $5 to get that certificate mailed to you. So obviously I'm not going to do it for every single fish I catch, right? Unless it's a really, really special fish. But the idea is that if over time I can build this collection of certificates saying, hey, I've caught this fish that's this size, this fish is this size. This is me improving as an angler, because not only do I have the photos of the fish and the videos of the fish and whatnot as proof for myself, but then I have the state recognizing me for my ability. So, I mean, it's kind of cool. Like I said, it's just a confirmation, if you will, of your learning and whatnot. And like I said, every state, to my knowledge, every state has one of those programs. But I know for sure that Tennessee and Georgia do. And And there's even some, like I said, in Georgia, they have ones for a number of species of the black bass family. And that's not necessarily saying, hey, I caught a trophy one of every one of these species, but I have caught one of all these species, which again is pretty cool. So the next species here we're gonna talk about is bluegill. So bluegill is technically a sunfish as well, but it is very pronounced in the fact that it has a blue gill, right? This is probably going to be the first species most people catch. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is a very plentiful fish. It can live in just about any kind of type of water, any kind of it doesn't matter if it's current, doesn't matter if it's stagnant water, if you will, if it's like a pond or a mud hole or even a mud puddle. If you have a place that floods and it leaves a puddle, you're probably gonna have a bluegill in there somewhere. They can be anywhere from as small as you can possibly see to hand size. Or like this guy, these are ones that are bigger than hand size, right? They can get pretty big. So, the world record is several pounds. I don't remember off the top of my head either. But the biggest thing is that they have this giant, the ear of their gill is blue. Then there's actually varieties of them too. I don't know if it's going to show me on here or not. Like this one right here, this is actually what's called a copper nose bluegill. And it's just a different variation on the color. Again, different areas have different varieties like this. These ones end up being more pale. They still have the blue ear, hence the bluegill, but their head's gonna be a little different color, and their back is gonna be a different color. You know, this is probably closer to what most of us are gonna see. This kind of oranger belly with the green back and the speckles and whatnot. But that blue ear is like I said, that's the big determining factor when it comes to identifying bluegill. And which leads me into my next one, which is going to be freshwater sunfish. Which again, freshwater sunfish, there are hundreds of different varieties of sunfish. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you how to identify every single one of them, because here's a good. That's not going to pull up, is it? It's not going to. Oops. All right. Anyway, here we go. Here's ones. This is just a few of them, right? You got red breast sunfish, warmmouth, orange spotted sunfish, dollar sunfish, long ear sunfish, pumpkin seed, red ear sunfish, green sunfish, spotted sunfish, and that's just the beginning of them. There's a long ear sunfish, which funny story about the long ear sunfish. So I was fishing with my wife last year, and we were catfishing. We were catching bluegill for bait. She caught a long ear sunfish. It was about the size of my hand. I didn't think nothing about it. Slapped that puppy on a hook, cast it out. It was out there for about an hour. Reeled in and checked my bait, and it was dead. My wife got curious because it was a very large long ear sunfish, biggest one I had ever caught. Well, I'm sorry, biggest one she had ever caught, biggest one I've ever seen. We weighed that thing. It was 3 ounces larger than the state record. But in the state of Tennessee, you cannot claim a state record fish unless it is alive. So my wife unofficially caught a state record long ear sunfish, and I killed it. So she's gonna hold that over my head for the rest of my life. But it is what it is. Another thing you'll commonly see, speaking of the warmouth especially, I have never caught a warmouth. I know this because I know enough of the other species to know that it was something else. The warmouth is a very interesting looking one. And there's quite a big debate on the internet about whether or not things are warmouth. And what you'll see a lot of memes or funny little comics about stuff like that. It's going to say, is this a warmouth? And it's literally going to be any other fish they pick up, because so many people misidentify this fish that it's not even funny, right? And look at the differences here, right? I mean, you got one like this, like, yellow fins. I would, from a beginner standpoint, if I wasn't knowing about the yellow fins and some of the other stuff and the aggressive temperaments and whatnot, I would have classified this as a bluegill when I was first starting fishing, right? But you got ones like this that are kind of plain, a little more sunfishy looking. Then you got ones like this where it looks like a bass. It's just tiny, right? And then you have ones that are, here's another good one. This one's trying to show you just a warmouth and what's considered a rock bass, which is another type of sunfish. Again, same similar pattern, same fin shape, but literally this literally counts about the spines on the fin is the difference. I mean, who's gonna sit there and think about that, especially when you're a new angler, right? So not everything is gonna be a warmouth, but it could be a sunfish. Almost everything is gonna be a sunfish, seems like, right? And literally these little tiny differences, right? Dark lines radiating from the eye, lacks the red or the purple on the ear flap. I mean, literally that little tiny bit of red, that's the difference between a warmouth and a rock bass. The fact that it has only 10 dorsal spines as opposed to 11 to 13. The fact that it has 3 anal spines on this fin rather than 5 to 7. Those little tiny nuances, that's the part that makes fish identification hard. So you'll see a lot of places like they'll have very specific limits for certain species. In Tennessee, for instance, the limit on bluegill and red ear sunfish is set, but other than that, it's just labeled sunfish, and that's for creel limits and purposes like that. Because these smaller fish, which again, a lot of these don't get very big. Some of these only get to be like 6 inches long max. Some of them are even smaller, but they live in various types of waters, various areas. Sorry, guys, I talked about the whole thing and I wasn't even showing the picture. Like I said, the warmouth here, rock bass here, right? Differences are so minute. I mean, you're looking at stuff like the little red color, like on that fin there, the number of spines, and you'll see there's some other species where the number of spines matters for identification, and including even a theory on a world record that's not actually a world record because of a supposed misidentification on the fish itself. But we'll go into that in a little bit. A lot of these sunfish species, they're so close in size, color. I mean, like this is mostly pictures of warmouth here in this particular instance. But again, if you go back to here's a pumpkin seed, right? Pumpkin seed, not much different than a bluegill. The biggest difference on these pumpkin seeds is all these markings. They're blue or green on these patterns because a lot of these sunfish are a little more flat colored. And then you have ones, here's the long ear sunfish, right? Kind of looks like a pumpkin seed because all the markings, but really looks like a bluegill because of this giant blue ear, right? But this ear is significantly longer in comparison to, say this fish right here, right? It's got a shorter ear on the thing, long ear sunfish. And then you got hybrids out the yin yang, right? There's so many hybrid species. Like this is a long ear red breast hybrid right here, right? And again, how are you going to know this is a new angler? It's just something that you go over time. Like here's some other ones, right? So I didn't even mention this one. You got the dollar sunfish, the orange spotted sunfish. I'm not going to keep trying to go into all these species because on the sunfish, because there's just so many of them between the hybrids and all the other type of stuff. I mean, it absolutely is insane how many different species there are out there of sunfish. Morning, Bugman. Morning, Viking. Hope you guys are doing fantastic. Hope you guys get a chance to go fishing today. If you are, feel free to type in the comments where you're going. I would love to hear about it. And if you're catching the replay on this, if you did get the chance to go fishing or you have caught a fish and we've identified the species so far, please put hashtag first and the species you think you caught. I would love to hear about that as well. And again, I hope this is helping you out so far. We're going to be covering a lot more species. This is just the beginning. This is going to possibly be a really long episode. It's possible this is going to run over an hour just because there is so much to cover. Yeah, so let's just get back into it. But there's so many different species of the sunfish that we're just going to stop this here because I don't want to keep going on this and take up everybody's time. The next fish we're going to cover is the freshwater drum. For a lot of people, they're going to be catching this whether either bass fishing or catfish fishing. They do. A lot of people call them a scavenger fish. That's not necessarily true. They do chase bait fish, and they will hit moving baits just as easy as baits that are sitting still. Some people call them croakers. Some people call them, various other names I will not say because this is one of the first species we've covered today. It's considered a trash fish. They're not overly popular in terms of people actively pursuing them, but excuse me, sorry. They are very plentiful. They're easy to find, and they get to be very large. The biggest one I've ever caught personally was 25 pounds, but there are people that have caught 30, 40, and even 50-pound freshwater drum. Now, they are related to the black drum and redfish, which are both saltwater varieties. And they are a member of the croaker family. And the easiest way to tell if something's related to a croaker family is actually while you're cleaning it. They have what looks to be rocks in their head by their skull, and that's what allows them to make the sound that they make. Hence the where they get their name. They make a croaking sound. It's kind of like a grinding of those rocks, and it's pretty interesting. But they get to be large. And again, you see people here holding these horizontally and by the mouth. That's going to be the safest way to deal with these fish, especially as they get larger. And that's just because that's displacing the weight along their spine. You don't really want to hold them like this. The smaller ones, again, it's okay. Same with largemouth bass, but you can break their jaw, and if they're big enough, you can break their back. Which obviously, if you're releasing them, you don't do that. Now, I will say these fish are. I've never ate one personally because I don't like keeping large fish when I'm keeping them. I'd rather keep smaller ones. But they're supposedly good eating, and people catch them. Here's another. This guy caught it on a fly rod. I mean, it's another somewhat popular technique to catch them because you can sight fish these guys. They are large enough, and they're kind of plain in color, so they're pretty easy to see. Like that one. That one's obviously not alive, right? But there's they're large. They're kind of plain looking. But again, a lot of people will say if you're bass fishing and you catch them, it means you're fishing too slow. They're going to be chasing the bait fish just like the bass are. And so by keeping that in mind, if you were pursuing bass, you did catch these, that means either A, you need to speed your technique up a little bit, or B, you're just in a big school of drum. But Randy Block talks about it a lot, that if you are catching drum, it just means you need to speed up your technique, whether it be changing the bait and going up faster or just literally reeling the whatever technique you're currently doing faster to get the drum off of it, because they are a little bit of a slow lumbering fish unless there's crazy active feeding. But again, with the smaller, the fact that they're plentiful and you can catch them on just about any kind of bait, there's very likely at some point in the near future, if you haven't caught one already, you will catch one soon. And so that's freshwater drum. Next species we're going to cover is the white bass. This is another fish that is this one's actually a considered true bass in terms of the family they're from, right? And there's actually 3 different ones. We're going to go over the other ones as well. But you have the white bass, which is significantly smaller and more square. You have the striped bass, which is significantly longer and larger. Looks more like a torpedo shape, and then there is a hybrid version between these. And like I said, we'll go over these a little bit. But the biggest thing with the white bass is going to be their head shape and their body shape. They're going to be more square, more bulky. They're going to have these solid stripes on their side. They go all the way back, and they can get pretty large. I mean, you get some that are pretty good size. That one, actually, I think that one's actually a striped bass. I'm not sure what they're doing with the mislabel on that. But like this one here, you have some that are the solid stripe, and a couple of broken ones, but they're going to have 2 or 3 of these fully striped bodies right here at the lateral line and above. But again, they are more square in terms of body shape as in compared to the ones we're about to cover next, which again is the striped bass. Striped bass are going to have a ton of horizontal lines going across the body. Again, they're more torpedo shaped in terms of the way they're shaped. It's gonna be longer. They're meant for speed. They're meant for crushing bait fish. Striped bass are actually not natively a freshwater fish. They are mostly a saltwater fish, but we do have large inland populations, like here in Tennessee. They're all over the Tennessee River, but one of the biggest spawning areas and actually is labeled a trophy fishery is the Watts Bar area of Tennessee. These fish, I forgot how many miles they have to have. They have to have a certain amount of mileage of moving water in order to spawn. and that's why you don't see them so much in freshwater. In saltwater, obviously, they have the whole entire ocean to spawn with. But the saltwater and the freshwater variety are the same fish. It's just a matter of location, obviously, in that regard. But again, in Tennessee, we have the Watts Bar fishery, which is labeled a trophy class fishery. But you see how these have these solid stripes? They're unbroken all the way back on like everything, and they're very pronounced. That's the easiest way to tell the difference between a striped bass and a white bass. Because if we go back to the white bass, again, it has a couple of solid stripes, but then it has the broken up ones below the lateral line. And again, the body shape is more square as opposed to being elongated and more like a torpedo. It isn't these two are very easy to mix up until you learn that part. And obviously, it's different for each species in terms of regulations. I don't remember off the top of my head how many allowed to keep in Tennessee, but I know with the striped bass, they have to be at least 18 inches long, and I think you can only keep 3. Whereas white bass, I'm pretty sure you're allowed to keep up to 10, I think, something like that. So it's quite a bit different. 351 Cleveland, hello. Hope you're doing fantastic, man. We're just going over some fish species identification and safe fish handling. Fantastic. All right, next one is the hybrid. All right, so what's the difference between a hybrid and a striped bass? Here's the best way to show, and this is kind of a blown out, a extreme example, right? But you see all these broken lines? They're going to have broken lines. Striped bass and white bass, you have the solid lines, and the white bass have the broken lines below the lateral line. A hybrid or a wiper is what they're called sometimes, are going to have the broken lines all the time, all the way through the body. They're going to go the whole entire length of the body, but they're broken in terms of, rather than it being one even line, they're going to be broken off above and below while still being in contact with that line. So these ones are the temperament is more aggressive, like a white bass, but their size gets bigger like a striped bass. So they are a commonly sought out species in terms of fight. But again, all 3 of these, the striped bass, the white bass, and the hybrid or the wiper, are actual true bass, unlike the largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass, which is technically a sunfish. David from Double Hook Angling says that in Kansas, 30 inches is the keeper size on striper, and you're allowed to keep 2. So again, the whole point of this episode, right, is fish identification. So for 2 reasons. One is to keep you out of trouble in terms of if you're harvesting fish. But 2, so you know what you're catching, and knowing that, hey, I did this and caught this species, I want to do it again. But going back to the wiper here, here's some more pictures of it. Like I said, it's got, may have 1 or 2 solid lines, but almost every single line is broken up. And these are going to have more of a torpedo shape as compared to a white bass, but they are going to be a little more blocky than a striped bass, just because of the of what they're related to. Big Mike, welcome in. Yes, or the ditch pickle family, as he's talking about. He's referring to largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. They're quite commonly referred to as ditch pickles by other non-bass fishing communities and forums. Just because, again, the whole idea is you can catch them anywhere and they're green, right? So they kind of look like a pickle. Next one's going to be the channel cat. All right, so a lot of people are going to catch channel cats. These do not care if the water's flowing or not, does not care if the water's muddy or not. They do have fairly good eyesight, but as you can see on their face, they have whiskers like a cat, hence the name catfish. That is how they find their food. They're basically a swimming tongue. They have all kinds of sensors on their barbels, which is what the whiskers are called. They got them all over the face. They got tongues, obviously, all that good stuff. Catfish do not have scales. They have it's just a solid skin, so they do have a lateral line still. But they are a scaleless fish, or not really truly scaleless. What it is that the scales are so small that you can't see them. It's attached to their skin. So, but the idea is that with these barbels and stuff, they're able to catch their bait, find their bait, all that good stuff. And this is going to be the most common one that both people are going to see. It is the most common across the entirety of the United States. Generally speaking, you're going to see them with the kind of yellowish colored back. and their head's going to be kind of flat. They're going to typically have an overbite. Same with blue catfish, whereas opposed to a flathead, which typically has an underbite, like this picture shows here. This right here, this species though, the channel catfish, the the world record. Let me just pull it up for you quick. Caught in South Carolina. Here it is. And there are people that are still to this day claiming this is actually a blue catfish, not a channel catfish, because if I'm not mistaken, this is 56 pounds. Nobody's come close to beating that record that I know of. But this one picture here, especially with it being black and white, and it gets blurry when you try to zoom in on it because it is an old photo. This is probably one of the most highly debated records in the fishing community because you cannot count the fins. The easiest way to tell the difference between a blue catfish and a channel catfish is to count the spines on the anal fin. Pulled it over. Here we go. This should have it on here. Yeah, here we go. Blue catfish are going to have 30 to 36 spines on their anal fin, whereas the channel cat is going to only have 24 to 29. And yes, they do say a blue catfish has a squared fin, whereas a channel catfish has a curved fin. These fish do live in some pretty harsh environments, logs, trees, rocks, and such. So their fins get damaged. So you're going to see some blue catfish that have rounded fins, especially if they're bigger fish or older fish, just because they've been around. So yeah, the easiest way is actually to count the little spines on the fin itself. It obviously, I'm going to just talk about all three of these, but the blue catfish and the flathead catfish get the biggest out of the two. Out of the three, the blue catfish typically is the biggest. I know that the state record flathead catfish is 85 pounds. State record blue catfish just got broke yet again by Micah, who broke it back in September. He broke it again 2 weeks ago. It was 118. Now it's 130, 131 or 133. It's huge. This dude is absolutely killing it when it comes to these big blue cats. But the state record blue catfish commercial fishing is 180 pounds. So I mean, they get to be very, very large. But all three of these, you can identify them as a catfish based on the fins. I'm sorry, based on the barbels on their face. Again, hence the name catfish. Looks like whiskers. But the three species are a little bit different. Flatheads typically have a square tail instead of a forked tail, and they have an underbite, and they'll usually have a more camouflage pattern. But their head is flat, hence the name flathead, right? Channel cats and blue cats, they both have overbites. Their heads are a little more round. But the blue catfish do to get significantly larger, and the easiest way, again, to identify the two is to count the spines on the anal fin. And again, that's what it leads to be. Sorry, 122 pounds on the blue cat, not 131. That's my mistake. But either way, big, huge fish. Big fish. Good stuff. One of my wife's favorite fish to catch because they do get so large. Several other people I know, that's their favorite fish for the same reason. They can be aggressive. The takedowns on the rod, if you're using a rod holder, they're fun to watch. They can bend the rod completely in the water. You can even lose rods. I know several people that have lost rods even just in the last year, just because they got yanked out of the rod holder and off in the water they went. Another species we're going to talk about is bullheads. They're another member of the catfish family. There's three different species of them. They have the yellow, the black, and the brown. The easiest way for me to describe a bullhead is a very fat, short catfish. They do. They like here's a good picture. See how fat this thing is? This thing, it looks like a football. And a lot of people use them for bait. A lot of people say they're good eating too. They don't get very big. You're like 3 or 4 pounds is a huge bullhead. But again, they do have the whiskers. They actually seem to prefer dirtier water. Or not as clean water, rather, because they literally eat anything, snails, worms, all that good stuff. Worms is probably one of the best ways to go after them. And they seem to prefer weedier areas in my experience, but you can find them in just about any body of water. But they also seem to prefer slack water over current water, whether it be slack water in a stream like an eddy or just still water in a lake that's not moving. But it's not something you can go to high current rivers to try to find. They're probably not going to be there. Another species that you guys will probably see at some point in your life is some sort of a sucker. I got the red horse sucker pulled up on this particular picture. But they're kind of long. If you've ever seen like a creek chub or a minnow or a shiner, they kind of look like that in terms of just body shape, elongated, kind of like a torpedo. The red horses obviously have a red tail and red fins, hence the red horse part of their name. There's several varieties of the red horse. You got the silver red horse, the golden red horse, the greater red horse. I mean, again, the sucker family goes into the same kind of category as the sunfish family, where there's just so many different varieties of them that people get them mixed up all the time. But besides the red horses, you got the blue sucker, you got the white sucker, and these fish they do prefer moving water, right? And they don't get to be as large. If you catch a sucker that's several pounds, that's a good size sucker. A lot of state records, I think, around a lot of them are like the mid-teens, low 20s in terms of just massive suckers. But a lot of the sucker species are going to stay pretty small. If you catch one that's 2 or 3 pounds, it's probably going to be a good sucker. And I don't know what everybody else does for them, but when I was a kid, my great grandma used to make fish patties out of them. They're a little bonier fish. So at that point, you would just boil them and then grind the meat and the bones all together and make these fish patties. And they were actually very delicious. But the biggest feature on a sucker that makes it very easy to identify is if you look at their mouth is a sucker. They literally attach to rocks to stay in the current and eat. And it's the easiest way to identify the suckers based on the mouth. And there's other sucker type fish that aren't related to suckers. Such as like the Pocossamus, which you see a lot of in Florida now. A lot of people see them in aquarium stores, but they're not. They weren't originally a native species. They are an invasive species now. But yeah, that sucker mouth there is what allows them to stay to rocks and stay in the river. And I am doing this again. Here we go. All right, here we go. All right, sucker mouth. This is how they attach to rocks and stay in the river and catch food to stay in the bottom of the river. Again, that mouth is very pronounced on this one in particular. And like I said, they can get kind of large. This is a several pound one right here. This was also a several pound one. But then you have smaller ones. Like this one's only about a foot long. And obviously they can get smaller. Here's another one. A very, very tiny one. That one's just looks like it's just grilled or baked. But they're pretty cool looking. Like that's a very large sucker right there. That's a silver red horse. But you see how big it is? I mean, that's not normal. That's a very large one. But these are hard fighting fish. They do prefer current. You can find them in lakes and in still waters, but especially during the spring and the fall. The spring is when they do their spawning, and they have a very aggressive temperament in the spring during their spawn, which is pretty cool. So a lot of people like fish form with worms or with corn, and they target them in the spring specifically because they're one of the first fish to spawn. They spawn during colder water. And again, there's different varieties of them. It's another fish that's plentiful that people don't target specifically because they do have that sucker mouth. Usually you want to go after them with smaller baits. But yeah, pretty cool stuff. Another species we'll cover right fast before I run out of time. Carp. You got common carp, which is what you see here. Looks like a goldfish, basically. And they get to be very large. World records over 100 pounds. Most people are going to see them in the States around between the 10 and 20 pound range, probably. There's two different varieties of the common carp. You have the common carp itself, which has just the regular triangle scales, but then you also have mirror carp, which has it's a mutation. It's the same species of fish, but they have these giant scales, singular scales, hence the name mirror carp. But then also in the United States, we're blessed with the buffalo, which is another. It's actually they're not even related to a carp, but they're called a buffalo carp. And there's 3 varieties of those. You have the black buffalo, the smallmouth buffalo, and the bigmouth buffalo. The smallmouth buffalo is kind of like what we've been looking at with the suckerfish. It has a sucker mouth, fairly small mouth in comparison to his body, and it's on the lower part of the jaw. A bigmouth buffalo actually has a regular mouth like a regular fish, but again, they can grow to be very large. A lot of the buffalo state records are in the 50, 60, 70 pound range. Very common fish to catch while fishing for carp. Also another common fish to catch while catfishing, as they are omnivorous. They don't eat only plants. And actually, the smallmouth buffalo, especially, I've caught several while I was jigging spoons for striper below dams. They do chase bait fish. They do breach the surface of the water, and they get to be quite massive. And they're a fun fight. And actually, funny story. So the fish I've been hurt by the worst ever. I've caught gar. I've caught other species that had lots of teeth. The one that hurt me the worst was a buffalo. I was holding it and it flopped and it slapped my chest so hard. It sounded like a gun went off. And I was right there next to the dam. It's a concrete wall. It echoed out. I mean, everybody stopped what they're doing to look. And all I could do was grab my chest because it literally knocked the wind out of me entirely. It was absolutely awful. But again, these bigger fish, catfish, drum, carp, all this stuff, you want to hold these guys horizontal because the weight, especially when they're larger like that, you see some people hold the catfish vertically. It's actually not good for the fish. The water displaces their weight across their spine way better than we can do. And then when you pull them out of the water, there's nothing to help hold their weight evenly. So then gravity is literally killing them and hurting them. So if you are going to release these fish, I'm going to suggest that you hold them horizontally instead of vertically. You'll see a lot of people that'll weigh them in weigh slings or in a net for that same reason. It's just wanting to displace that weight so you're not breaking their spine or their jaw. And then another thing I will say, you'll see a lot of people, they'll hold carp and buffalo and catfish by the gills. You really don't want to do that either, because the gills are their lung. I mean, if you're going to kill it, then that's fine. Do what you want. But if you're going to let it go, you don't want to do that because you can possibly damage their gill, which will kill them. Because they got to be able to breathe just like any other creature, including ourselves. If somebody come here and ripped your lung out, then obviously you're not going to make it very long. Another species I want to cover quick because I didn't get a chance to do that yet was the muskie and the pike. These are both. Here's just a quick thing here. They're both torpedo-like fish. You also have the pickerel, which is a much smaller version. The easiest way to identify the difference between a muskie and a pike is the patterns. Muskies are going to have the vertical stripes more often than anything else, whereas pike are going to have these little blotches. That's the easiest way I can say to tell the difference between the two. But these fish get to be massive, and they're predatory fish, and they're fast. They prefer moving baits, but you do see them get caught on floating dead minnows below a float. It's quite common in Europe to do it that way, or in ice fishing, a lot of people use the tip-ups, which is what they're called. It's a little technique where you have the bait under the water and it's got a little flag, and if it gets hit, it pops up, hence tip up. But you can see these fish like weedy, clean water. The sight is their main ability to find food. They have a lateral line, obviously, so they can detect movement and stuff like that, but they don't have, their sense of smell is not as great as some of the other species. Obviously, catfish are the swimming tongues. They probably have the smelling thing down better than any other species out there. These guys are sight-based. Same with bass, same with sunfish. Most of them are sight-based. And they like moving baits, and they like fast baits. And don't let the size fool you on some of these fish. Just because they're that big does not mean there's something else out there that won't go after them as well. You see pictures like this all the time where there's a pike or a muskie that's ate another one that's the same size as it. And it does occasionally happen like this right here. That muskie's eating that brown trout, and that brown trout's huge. It may or may not make it. Like this one right here, this one did not make it. This one tried eating a bass that was bigger than it, and it couldn't swallow it. It died. They literally can eat themselves to death. It's pretty crazy. Here's another one, big muskie with a smaller pike in its mouth. That one might have been staged. I don't know if they actually caught that one that way or not. But that's these fish get to be massive, and they're really cool. They're not super popular. Sorry, in Tennessee in terms of numbers. We do have more of them than we used to, but they're really really common up north in the cooler states. I do prefer cooler, cleaner water. Both of those species, and pickerel are the odd man out in that regard. They look like a pike. They're significantly smaller. They do like cleaner-ish water, but they can survive in water that's nowhere near as clean as the rather than the muskie or the pike. A lot of them do grassy creeks, grassy lakes, weed beds, stuff like that. That's not a pickerel. And there's a couple of different varieties of pickerel, but it's kind of like sunfish. There's very little difference between the different species of the pickerels. And they're quite easy to catch. They're very aggressive fish. They'll hit moving baits really easy. A lot of people catch them on spinners, or you can catch them just with minnows under a float if you're going crappie fishing or stuff like that. Another species we're going to cover quick because I am running out of time is the crappie. You have the white crappie and the black crappie. What's the biggest difference between a white crappie and a black crappie? Well, it's going to be the pattern on the body. White crappie, you're going to have vertical blotches, and then black crappie, you're going to have a speckled pattern. Now, that's the easiest way to tell by looks. The actual best way to tell is actually, again, like the catfish is counting the spines. In this case, the spines on the dorsal fin are going to be the best one. Black crappie have more spines on the dorsal fin than the white crappie. These can get to be 5, 6, 7 pounds. In Tennessee, you're allowed to keep, I think, 15 of them, and they had to be 10 inches or it's either 10 inches or 12 inches or larger. So they're considered a panfish, but they are their own separate species, their own separate genus. I do not believe, if I remember correctly, I don't think they're related to sunfish. They're not in that family. But they are a panfish, since the nickname coming from the fact that a good size one will fit in a pan, right? So these, like this is right here is a good example. This is why it can be hard to tell between a white crappie and a black crappie. This one has vertical blotches, right? But it's of the speckles. So on the fish like this, you would have to count the spines in order to figure out for sure if it's a white crappie or a black crappie. Now, most states aren't going to have a different creel limit for the two. They're going to be just a category of themselves, and hey, you can keep this many of a crappie. Doesn't matter which variety. But in terms of trying to identify those fish, again, counting the spines is going to be the best. White crappie only have 5 to 6, whereas black crappie have 7 or 8. But if you can actually see the pattern, and it can be very obvious, like in this illustration here, it's just a straight up stripe on the white crappie, where it's nothing but speckles on the black crappie, because they're irregular blotches versus a very obvious vertical blotch. But again, you will have some every once in a while. Like this one right here is a black crappie, but that one in particular, that one would be hard to tell if it was a white or a black, just because of the fact that it's so close. And it wouldn't surprise me personally if there's some hybrids of those. I don't know if they actually can, but it wouldn't surprise me. Like here's a very obvious white crappie, again, vertical stripes versus the black blotches. And yeah, that's crappie. So one more species before we go is going to be the walleye and the sauger. This is a fish that's very common up north. We have them in Tennessee. They get stocked here in Tennessee, and actually the Dale Hollow Reservoir is known as a very good fishery for walleye, for big walleye. They are another predatory fish. They have teeth. They like moving baits. They like minnows. They like leeches. They will eat night crawlers. They're set up they have the lateral lines and all that good stuff, like any other fish, so they can sense movement. Their eyes are closer to the top of their head, so they do usually sit more towards the bottom of the water column, and they look up. But they are ambush predators. They are usually a camouflage color. They are related to yellow perch, which is another little fish that's quite common in the United States. But yellow perch, sauger, and walleye like I said, are predatory fish. Their eyes are more on the top of their bodies. So they're more ambush predators. Whereas a perch is more like a regular fish, where their eyes are a little bit lower on the face. They can suspend and be just fine. But all of them chase minnows. The biggest difference between a sauger and a walleye is going to be the fins. Walleye have the white tips on all of their lower fins, whereas sauger do not. And then usually the sauger is going to have a more pronounced blotches of black on their body, like in this photo here. Um, they're also going to have spots on their fins and whatnot. These guys have sharp gill plates, so you have to be careful when you're handling them. They can cut your hands open. You also do not want to stick your hands in their mouth, um, because they have the crazy teeth. Here's a good photo. I can show it to you. They have the regular rows of teeth, but then they have two sets of longer teeth on the top and bottom of their mouth. And what those do when they bite down, those longer teeth hold the prey in their mouth so they can't get away. If you get your finger stuck in that, it does not feel good. Any walleye angler that pursues them on the regular can tell you. Here's another good picture of them. See those longer fins there? Those are what keep that bait stuck in their mouth. And the way that guy's handling it, again, you don't really want to do the gill hold, but this is one of those species where you almost have to hold it by the gill if you're going to hold it, just because their gill plate is so sharp and it can hurt you. So, yeah, that's it. That's fish identification. We went over some different species, walleye, bass, talked about the fact that the bass is not actually a bass, it's a sunfish, haha. Talked about warmouth, other species of sunfish, different varieties of pumpkin seed, sunfish, and we go to the catfish family, blue catfish, flatheads, channel cats, bullheads. I mean, the white bass, or aka the true bass family. You got the white bass, striped bass, hybrid bass, and these are all things that are fish that some people actually commonly go after on purpose. A lot of these are just fish that there's plenty of and people catch on the regular. But I hope that this information I've given you is going to help out you newer anglers trying to identify what fish you've actually caught. I also hope that it explains some of the better practices in terms of fish handling. So you release the catch, if you want to release it, that it actually goes home safe and sound and is able to live on. But again, the handling practices, if you're going to just eat it, that's fine. Do what you want to do with it. It is what it is. You have that right. You have that choice as a fisherman. But if you are wanting to catch and release, keep in mind that there are certain ways to handle fish that are better than others, that are better for the fish, especially larger fish. Generally speaking, if you catch a fish that's larger for that species that it is, you're going to want to hold it horizontally instead of vertically. If you have something, you're going to hold it by the lip. You do not want to hold it at an angle. You want to hold it either straight vertical or, again, hold it horizontal like you would a larger fish. It's just to prevent them from breaking their jaw or getting their gills damaged or breaking their spine, because underwater weight displacement is completely different than it is out of the water. And they can become victim to gravity, being detrimental to their health. So, yeah. Any questions? If you guys got any questions, let me know. Put them in the comments below. Let's get back to the chat. Sorry, guys. It's been a very long episode. I was trying to make sure I got done with all the information before it got too late. Rustic, hello. NJ, good morning. Dustin, what's up, buddy? Good job hosting the show last night for Pontoon Jody's Flathead Challenge. Was a pretty slow night last night, but I still enjoyed it. Randall Rhino, good morning if you're still here. I think I said hi to 351 already. Bugman, if I haven't said hey, hello. Yes, crappie is one of my favorite fish as well, Rustic. NJ, Tiger Muskie. Yeah, I think that's what we have in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken, is Tiger Muskie, not the regular one. But they're almost exactly the same, other than I think the red fins. So that identification-wise, it's kind of hard again, like some of the other species we talked about today. Travis, good morning. Let's see. What else we got here? NJ said later, take it easy. Ernie said goodbye. Oh, yeah, no, Ernie, she doesn't get anything at all. She She's a perfect angel. Never touches anything she's not supposed to. Never eats anything she's not supposed to. Never chokes on her food. All that good stuff. But yeah, all right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and call it, guys. This is the newest episode of the Yakkity Yak Fishing Podcast. Again, I hope you guys learned something today based on the fish identification. If I missed anything in something that for you more avid anglers or guys that aren't as new to the sport, if I missed something, feel free to put it in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. Love to check it out. Love to talk about it. You guys can reach me at yakshoreoutdoors@yahoo.com if you ever got any questions or concerns. There's also going to be a link in the description for a form to be able to ask me any kind of questions or tell me any of your thoughts. If you want to just tell me that I'm an idiot, that's fine. If you want to say hello, that's fine. More than happy to hear from you. But I hope this helped you guys out. Hope it helped somebody out. If it did, again, love to hear about it. Let me know. Next episode, if you're catching it live, is going to be on Sunday next week at 7 a.m. Otherwise, if you're watching the replay or listening to the audio, I appreciate you guys coming in. If you are listening to audio for this episode, I do apologize. This one's definitely more one of the ones that was more geared towards the video side of things. But I hope that I explained it enough that maybe it'll help you guys out still. And you can catch all these replays and everything on YouTube, on either the live stream tab if you want to watch the raw footage, or you can catch it on the playlist of the Yakkity Yak podcast playlist, which has these all broken down and edited a little bit. So it's a little more just to the information, not so much talking to the chat and stuff. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next week on the Yakkity Yak Fishing Podcast. Y'all have a good one. Get out there, catch some fish. Let us know how it goes.